I'm Linda Arts. I'm the supervisor of Cedar Creek Township. And back there is Janice Barnhart. She is the supervisor of Bridgeton Township. So welcome, Janice. We're so happy that you could join us today. This is really exciting for all of us. This is a project that we're really looking forward to hearing more about. This started, I think, back in September, and our board was really supportive of exploring the options, hearing more about it, wanting to know where this would lead us. This is an exciting study, and lots has been happening. In the Muskegon River Watershed Assembly. But so much has been going on behind the scenes, and that's why you're all here with us today. My voice won't hold out, sorry. So, with that, I want to turn this over to Scott Faulkner. He is the man who knows everything about this. And behind
Marty.
Scott is Dr. Marty Hultgren. And also with us is Frank Beaver, who
Good morning.
So you'll find out a lot more about this. So Scott, if you would take this away. Scott is the executive director of the Muskegon River Watershed Assembly. Scott, thank you for joining. They've had a long trip. They are on the road all the time. So Scott, thank you very much.
Thank you, Linda. Do you want to hit the lights maybe just for, yeah, there you go. I think it'll show up a little bit better. Well, good morning, everybody. Thanks for making time on a busy Friday to be here on what we think is a really important project, potentially. Understand, too, that we're in the early stages, and part of the reason we really wanted this meeting as a public meeting is we do a lot of things behind the scenes. That doesn't mean under the radar. It means that we have to do things, and then things happen, and we have to disclose them. And so we're here to tell you a little bit about the work that we've been doing over the last few months. And indeed, you'll find out that the work started years and years ago at the request of this township in Bridgeton. So it's been a public-driven kind of initiative for a long time, and we hope to bring everybody up to speed. We're also here primarily to hear from you. Many of you we've met face-to-face before. We've made every effort to do that. We're going to continue to try and do it for people that are affected. I mean, I live on this watershed too. I live on the Muskegon River, the Little Muskegon River up in Croton. And so I understand what it's like to live in a dam area, and to deal with the things that have to do when people start sniffing around your property and are talking about doing things with the river or lake in my case. So I really know what it's like to live in an area kind of like this, not exactly, but at least that's on the same body of water. So I like to think I've got a pretty easy ear to listen to, and we're here to hear from you. There's plenty of time set aside toward the end. We're not here just to talk to you. We're here to listen. So with that in mind, I really wanted to start with the conversation, where it's at now, some of the thinking that's going into this project at the MRWA board level, and with the staff that's here too. I also wanted to mention too, we've got, introduce yourself.
My name is Sarah Himes, and I'm the Assembly Assistant for MRWA.
Yeah, and we also have some board members here, Jeff Edwards and Wayne Groskoff. So we have some representation from our organization too. So when you talk to us, you're talking to them too. And so we'll just go ahead and get started. And it's the arrow key. So the things that we'll put together, this is what we hope to cover in maybe the next half hour, and the rest of it is you folks. What we want to cover is talk about what we do as an organization. Who is in your backyard? It's a fair question. How do we look at projects today? Of all the things, and understand that we cover 9 counties. We start at Higgins Lake, Houghton Lake, and go all the way to Lake Michigan by Muskegon. So this is by no means the only thing that we're looking at or doing for a living. So it's a big piece of ground, and so we want to talk about how we select a project, whether that's Maple River, whether it's a sewer project around Higgins Lake or Houghton Lake. How do we look at that stuff so you understand where we're thinking? We're going to spend a bit of time. Marty and I will introduce some of our alliance partners. This could be a very massive project. We're a small nonprofit. We cannot do this project without a lot of partners and a lot of funding, which we don't happen to have. So, with that in mind, we'll talk about our partners. And the final 2 points, which I think are the most important, is where are we at right now? What have we been working on behind the scenes? What kind of new data are we getting in? What does it look like today? Is this a viable project or is it not? And it could be either one of those answers at the end of the day. We want everybody here to be sure that you're aware that we're looking at it that way. We don't have all the scientific information yet. We don't have the economic impact analysis done yet. We don't have that stuff. And until we do, there's not going to be a project. There has to be another series of meetings where we look at this together and say, this is where all the data's coming in. Do we proceed or not? So that's the beginning of that process today. Any questions so far? That's kind of what we hope to cover. A little bit about Muskegon River Watershed Assembly. We're up in Fair State University, and it's been around for about 23 years. We're a 501c3, not-for-profit, and that means that contributions such as grants, donations, memberships, events, and sponsorships are tax deductible typically. If you like the work we're doing, join us, please. We need the money, trust me, it's a nonprofit. Our mission, which I think is important to view in light of the Maple River project, is this. We are dedicated to the preservation, protection, restoration, keyword for today, and sustainable use of the Muskegon River, the land it drains, a lot of land around the Muskegon River watershed, the life it supports through education, scientific, and conservation initiatives. So this effort falls into both preservation, restoration, and sustainable use. How are we looking at this project? We view it as a restoration project. That, in other words, the logging industry came through, dammed up the Maple River. We would like to restore it if that makes sense, and only if it makes sense. So we'll go over how we kind of look at that and ask for your input in the process. So that's who we are. I could talk for hours about that, but it would be exceedingly boring. This is what we're working on now. So in addition to what we're looking at here, which we consider to be a high priority and a high impact project, Maple River is very high impact to us. The Reconnect Muskegon vision is this. If we had a large vision about the Muskegon, it would be to reconnect it at important parts. So if you stepped way back and said, where's the Muskegon River watershed messed up the most? It's the large hydro dams at Croton, Hardy, and Rogers, right? That's kind of obvious for navigation purposes. However, when we talk a little later about how we view those projects, if you took out those three dams, probably $2 billion worth of residential real estate would become half the value overnight. So are we going to do that? No. It would cause too much damage. So we're not just an environmental organization. We're trying to think it through, right? But the Reconnect Muskegon vision has to do with how do we reconnect the Muskegon River environmentally? Well, there's a lot of new science that suggests that you can put bypass channels around dams and fish ladders that allow fish to migrate and allow microorganisms to do the same. We think that's a really smart idea, particularly when Hardy Dam Spillway Project is a $200 million project that's being done now under the auspices of public safety. And while that is a good and wise thing to look at, if you're going to drop $200 million, how about putting in a fish ladder while you're at it? That's sort of our attitude. We think that's a fair request of Consumers Energy, of FERC, and of Eagle. And we're going to make our case in every opportunity that we have, and that includes today. So that's a little bit about that in the Spillway Project. Marty and I are also active in Garish and Lyons Townships. Those are the ones that surround Higgins Lake, way up north at the beginning of the watershed. Like a lot of lakes, for those of you that live on a lake, you know that over time sewers fail. And when they do it 4,000 times around a body of water, you can bet that if you put that load and if you add in lawn fertilizers, that beautiful clear lake is not going to be clear and beautiful for much longer. So we're engaged up there at Garish and Lyons Township to say, what role can we play from a scientific perspective to say what can be done in terms of putting in a sewer system around the lake. That's likely to be a $300 million project. It's huge. It's going to have a lot to do with what the taxpayers and what the residents there have to say, because they're going to have to vote themselves a tax increase. Never a safe bet in a small community, right? But that's one of the ones that we're involved in. And really importantly too, these are things that Marty and the organization have been involved in for a decade now, and that's small dam removals. There are 90 plus small dams along the Muskegon. It's a big number. And many of them were put in for noble purposes at the time, right? They were a grist mill. They were a logging operation. They were to control floodplain for a farmer. All good things, but the problem is they were built to last about 50 years and they're 100 years old. And many of them are creating a hazard for erosion. They're in danger of collapsing and causing a lot of damage. So when we are asked, when we are invited, we come in and say, you got a problem dam? We're here to help. And we're fairly good at finding funding to get those removed to improve fish habitat and other things. But that's when we're invited. And the ones that you see up here, whether that's Altona, Buckhorn, Kinney, these are all dams in different parts of the Muskegon River watershed. Those are projects that we're actively engaged in dam removal. We're invited to do it, we're happy to do it, but we don't show up in the middle of nowhere and say, we want to take your dam out. That really doesn't work so well, and we'll talk a little bit about why that doesn't work so well in a minute. Tree plantings, this is something you might not suspect of a watershed organization, but restoring the integrity of shorelines and banks along the river is super important. If you're a farmer, you understand this completely, because if your shoreline erodes too much, you don't have much of a farm over time. So we are very active in getting tree planting grants done, planting the trees, organizing the volunteers to do so, and helping to regrow stable banks around the Muskegon River watershed. So that's something we do a lot of, and it's a lot of fun to do. And then finally, Trash Bash. Sarah is in charge of Trash Bash this year, and that's an event that goes on the entire month of August. And it's a virtual event, meaning that it's not like you don't show up, but it's not on one day like a lot of river cleanups are. It's this Saturday no matter what. We found we got a lot better participation, and actually the COVID-19 disaster helped us a lot in this regard. People could find their own teams, work their own section of river. We organize it so you don't clean the same section 25 times with a different team. And this past year we had over 318 participants, a bunch of teams, and we cleaned up the vast majority of a 219-mile long watershed. Pretty cool. What our hope is, I'll announce this today anyway, Cedar, is it won't happen this year, but we're trying to set the tone for a Guinness Book of World Records for the largest river cleanup to occur in the United States. So we're looking at it this year, hopefully next year,
Yeah.
maybe 2 years. We'll get there, but that's our hope. Point being, you guys live in this watershed. Please sign up for Trash Bash. It's a fun thing to do. It's a great thing to do for church groups. It's a great thing to do for families. It's a great thing to do for family reunions. You're all going to be together on a Saturday. Spend 4 hours, take a bunch of kayaks, go up and down the river, pull out tires, pull out junk. It's a lot of fun, and that's how we keep the watershed clean. So that's a little bit about what we do today. So this is, if you want to know how we think about stuff and how our board thinks about stuff, this is probably the most important thing that I can tell you today. It'd be easy to assume that we're just a bunch of environmentalists trying to do good things for the planet. Okay, we are. Guilty as charged. That's one way to look at it. And there are 4 ways that we tend to view our projects, and these are the 4 ways that we view it, and these are equally important, okay? So from a scientific and environmental impact perspective, is this project a net gain for the watershed? Is it good for the watershed? It's not an easy question to ask, right? If you pull out a dam, for example, and all kinds of silt goes downstream and completely destroys another section of river, you haven't gained much. So we have to be careful about how we answer that question in a lot of ways that Marty and others understand far more than I do. The second one, which is close to all of our hearts and minds, is our pocketbook. Okay, is what we're proposing. This is very valid for Maple River for this project. What happens if we do this economically to the people that are most affected? You guys live here. It's important to us to know and have some perspective on what could happen economically, whether you're a farmer losing property, whether you're a person that bought property with the expectation of a really cool dry channel in the middle of it. We don't want to mess with your pocketbooks. And so as we look at this project, we've enlisted the help, and you'll learn a little bit more about this later, from the Michigan State University Center for Economic Analysis. That's a lot of words. But it's basically folks that do economic impact studies and say, if they do this, what will happen? What will happen to folks downstream, upstream, in the middle of the project area? What will happen? And we need to answer that question. So we start with the environmental and scientific side. Does it make sense for the watershed? We add the additional, does this economically impact the area correctly? As I mentioned earlier, right, I live on Croton Pond. There are 600 residences on Croton Pond who really like the way that pond looks. Believe me, I look at it every morning. I don't want to go in anywhere. And so any kind of project that wants to make my water view go away, I'm not going to be real supportive of. And I'm going to guess that each property there in the last 2 years, we all look like economic geniuses because we all gained $100,000 in net value of our property just for waking up in the morning. And what happens to that if you take the water away? So the idea of just yanking out Croton Dam and saying, great, we have an environmental win. But if you lose $500 million in the process and people go bankrupt, not cool. We can't do that project, right? So that's the give and take that we're trying to do. Here's one that's probably really true about all of us today. It's people. Do people want it? Okay. It's easy to say too that in this day and age, the idea of getting 100 people in a room to say yes to anything is impossible. It's not going to happen. But what is the general thinking of the population that lives here? If most people think, you know, I know that we're used to things as they are, but if we did this, would it be a net gain to my property? Would it be a net gain to the community? Would it be better for my neighbor downstream? Would it be better for my neighbor upstream? So we really want to know, and that's why we're here today. So what do the residents think? Because you can say, hey, we've got a great environmental project, the numbers look good. If all the people are against it, that project ain't happening, right? We know that. We try to be very realistic and very, very clear about that stuff. So that's the third one. And then the final one is sustainability. And these are commonly held beliefs, especially with our partner at Little River Band of Ottawa Indians. Think ahead. It's another way of saying think ahead. If we do this project, it makes sense from an environmental perspective. It makes sense from an economic impact perspective. The people want it, generally speaking. What's going to happen 100 years from now? Because the fact is, we're dealing with that problem here today. Because they weren't thinking 100 years ahead. They said, we got to get some logs out of here. Put some mud up here, some logs, get those things out of here. And when they were done, they walked away. Not a very sustainable practice. Not very long-term thinking. We don't want to be those people. I don't want my great-grandchildren, my great-great-great-grandchildren being in this room 150 years from now thinking, what were those idiots doing when they opened up Maple River? So we have to think about that. What is the impact long-term of this project? So just to summarize, everybody, this is how we try to view things. This is how Marty and I and the staff, our board, tries to look at things. Does it make sense environmentally, scientifically? What happens economically to this thing? What happens if we do it? What do the people think? What do the people in this room think about this project? Doesn't matter. And then finally, if all those things are good, try to look out in the future. It's not easy for us to do because we're a fast-moving culture, right? We got a problem, fix it. Got a problem, fix it. But if you start thinking longer term, does it make sense to have a healthier watershed? Well, probably. But as we go through these first 3 points, we'll end up with a sustainability question that we also want to adequately address. So that's who we are. That's how we try to think. Are we perfect? Not even close. Our alliance partners, Marty's going to join me now, and as I mentioned earlier, we cannot do this alone at all. Cannot. So we have to depend on a lot of other partners. I'll just mention the first two, and they're kind of in reverse order. We like to start local, and so the two townships here, Cedar Creek and Bridgeton, have been very open to our conversation and very welcoming, as evidenced by opening up the township hall on a closed day. Thank you, Linda, for that. And I'd also add, too, that they're good, supportive, but skeptical leaders. They want to be certain, as leaders in your townships, that this is a good idea. They're not all-in advocates. They're great people that want the right thing for their township. So I want to really thank you both, Linda and Janice, for you being here and for welcoming us, at least for the opportunity to speak. And then the other one, which I would like to talk a little bit about, is early on, we realized that we don't have all of the technical acumen that you need to really look at this project. And so we reached out to the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers that has plenty of resources. And by the way, your taxpayer dollars. And so you're my taxpayer dollars. And they're really good at engineering and looking at projects like this. So for almost a year, we've been meeting regularly with them, keeping them updated. They know this project because there's been other scientific studies that have been gone on before. And as a result of that, there's already some data that they can look at. They are engaged, and they will be much more deeply engaged, looking at the project from this perspective. What happens if we do it and it floods? What happens if we have a 10-year flooding event, a 50-year event, a 100-year flood event? They're going to answer that question, and they can do it. They know what they're doing. So they're going to be around to answer those questions. And then finally, my last point, and I'll turn it over to Marty, is the counties. We haven't been terribly active with the counties other than we invite representation. We invite the county commissioners to come to meetings. Brian Colk's been very active in Bridgeton. And we welcome county engagement on this project too, because sooner or later it reaches everybody's desk, right? You don't want it to be a surprise at one county that goes, what the heck are you guys doing down in Bridgeton and Cedar Creek? So with that in mind, I'm going to let Marty take it from here and talk about the other partners that we have. And then as Marty finishes up, he's going to talk a lot more about the science and what we know now. And then we'll both get up and we'll be happy to engage questions just as long as you want to be. I told Marty, I'm not leaving until everybody has their questions answered. So it's supposed to be from 10 to 12. If it goes longer, we don't care. we're here, and we're grateful for your participation. So thanks, everybody. With that, Dr. Marty Holtman's going to answer questions and do some presentation too. So, thanks.
Well, it's nice to be here and see actually a lot of familiar faces and the new ones too. I view this alliance partner as being really a group that kind of steers the direction of this project. And it was important for us to have diverse partners, because as we get to the point that we start having to answer questions and look at the issues facing this project, this steering committee will help us do that. And some of the key partners that have been with us from the very beginning, one is DNR Fisheries Division, and thank you, Scott, for being here today. They're a critical partner in helping us look at the change to fisheries, but also to habitat and many other important facets. Another key partner is the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, who has a lot of scientific expertise in river restoration projects, and really going to help round out that technical group that we have looking at it. I was actually brought into this project by the agricultural community, and it's been a pleasure to get to know folks here. The community is going to be a key driver to answering some of those questions that we have. And as Scott had mentioned, one of our partners is also the Little River Band of Ottawa Indians. They have biologists on staff, and we've been working hand in hand with them over the past couple months, and it's really a blossoming relationship. And with that, I wanted to introduce Frank Beaver. He is the director from the Little River Band of Ottawa Indians.
Good morning.
So, Frank, thank you. Oh, you were too slow.
Yeah, it's fine. I don't have too much to say. I just kind of drove over this morning. Okay, so we're, I asked, like Marty said, we have a couple biologists, so I asked for a couple slides. So I'm going to discover, and they sent them along. So I'm going to discover them along with everyone else in the room. So it looks like our first one is on wild rice. So that is obviously a key part of any riverine system where the tribe would be interested in ours. I guess I'd say our treaty reserved hunting, fishing, gathering rights that we have as a tribe. Throughout the ceded territory, that's about 14 million acres or so of the northern lower peninsula and the eastern part of the upper peninsula. So that's kind of where we have responsibilities and desires to see a good, solid habitat that supports native species, including our wild rice. And what did you send me for the
Wild
second
rice
one?
again.
Yes. Well, you can tell Allison is a wild rice biologist. This is,
Latin names.
yeah. So we have two different. Marty, maybe you could help me out on this one, because Marty is a scientist. I am just a director, so I just move budgets around and paper around. But Marty, if you could talk maybe a little bit about the difference on these two.
Sure. So we have Zizania palustris and then Zizania aquatica, and one is neither are common, but one is a more common species where the other is a protected species within the state. They also have different habitat requirements.
Right.
And so as we look at the different types of wild rice within this watershed, we have to consider the different needs that each of those species of rice have as we move forward on this project. And there are wild rice stands right now in the Maple River. We have toured those with Frank and with others, and it will be a key piece. And the beauty of wild rice too, it's a species which is amazing at filtering and having really good ecological benefits, and even for flooding too, and it can absorb water quickly. So we're excited that that's an important piece of this project, and Frank will probably be a little more reserved about this, but they have one of the experts within the entire Great Lakes on staff, and she's been doing wild rice research for over a decade, and we're excited to have her help us as we move forward, not just on wild rice, but other types of aquatic habitats as well.
Yep, absolutely. Well said. Thank you, Marty.
I'm not a wild rice expert.
Way more than I am. And so, yeah, wild rice is obviously one of the more public-facing parts of this watershed for where the tribe is interested in. But as I kind of alluded to earlier, any habitat improvement that helps our native species and supports that, whether those be fishery, wildlife, or various other species, that's kind of why we're here, that this is important to us, and if there's any assistance that we can offer as a partner, we're happy to do that. So,
Thank you.
thanks, Marty.
So I wanted to give just a little bit of history on the project. I was not involved from the beginning, and neither was Scott. So some of you are going to be much more familiar with the history than I am. But in 2010 is really when this project started. So about 12 years ago, MRWA was contacted by some landowners and some community members from this area. And I know, Wayne, you were involved and some others here. And Gail, I believe you were involved in that too. So
Since 98.
since 1998. And Wayne, you just as long, right? And landowners had approached MRWA. We did some site visits. A committee was formed to start looking, I think, at the potential of what this could look like. And one of the big issues was flooding that the community had faced for over 100 years. And so when we came and visited, that was one of the major discussions. I think it was also a time just to think what could a river that was opened up be to the community? You know, what are some of those possibilities that exist? So a series of questions came up about what would this do if we started opening this up? And U of M was brought in. Dr. Mike Wiley, he's a hydrologist, was brought on board to start helping to answer and provide information for some of these questions. And they started doing field sampling in 2012, and like any good scientific study, it took a while. So in 2016, I believe, there was actually 2015, a report was generated, and a technical committee started going through what some of those findings were. One major one was that there would be potential benefit to both the frequency but also the magnitude of floods. So overground water showing up on roads, on fields, that was a major positive to this project moving forward. There were also some risks and concerns that were brought up during that study too that needed to be looked at and evaluated more. After that, there was you'll see a little bit of lag in the timeline. We had some turnover at the Watershed Assembly. But then in 2018, I received a call. I just started and was given a tour by Roger Peacock. And we went and looked at some sites. He shared kind of a vision of what that earlier team had looked at. And quite honestly, I got pretty excited looking at what at least some of the potential could be for a river that was starting to flow again. So at that point, we started moving forward. The advisory team was back up and running, and we started doing public meetings. I think our first was in Bridgeton 2 or 3 years ago, before Janice had come on board, I think, at that point. So that takes us to where we are now. And I wanted to talk a little bit about where we are currently. And this is kind of the same design as what Scott had presented on how do we look at a project and how do we answer some of those questions. And this slide addresses some of those. The first is from the environmental side. So what does it look like as far as some of those risks and benefit? And we are working with the Little River Band and the Army Corps of Engineers to do a hydrological analysis of the watershed, which should take about a year. And I'll talk about a U of M study in a moment, but that was really the foundation of this study. One of the findings of that study was, hey, there could be some benefits, but there's also some further data needs that you're going to have. We need to go finer scale on this to really flesh what those are out. And so that's what we're doing with Army Corps. They're going to do some modeling. They're going to once again look at the flooding benefits. They're going to look at different scenarios for restoration, which I'll talk about in a minute, and the benefits to fish and habitat, but also the impacts to our infrastructure, you know, such as roads and road stream crossings, because many of our culverts right now they're already too small, let alone if we start allowing water at an increased rate to pass through those. The second piece, which Scott had mentioned, we're working with Michigan State University, and that's to answer those economic questions. Will there be an increase or decrease in property value? What does flooding insurance look like under different scenarios? Property loss, recreation, and would it bring tourism in? Would it decrease? So there's all these questions they're objectively looking at so we can get answers and be more informed about what the economic impact would be to all of you here in the community. The third is the people part, and just doing the restoration projects over the last 15 years, I've realized probably the most important piece is working with the public. And we're gonna talk about a strategy, but this is the beginning of numerous pieces of relationship building, of getting to know all of you, to know what the concerns are, to know what the excitement is, but to know, because we don't want to go into a restoration project where we don't have what we need to evaluate it appropriately. And as Scott said, there's a lot of questions to answer, and that's why we're here, is to work through those questions with all of you. And the final piece, and I think, Roger, you could probably speak to this better than me, is sustainability of a project, because this is a large-scale project. It's probably one of the largest that the Watershed Assembly has worked on, and that means it needs to be sustainable. You have partners that are going to see it through, not just for 1 year, it's already been a decade, and it might be quite a few years depending on what scenario, is selected at the end. So there's two lenses that I'm really looking through here as we evaluate the Maple River. The first, I want to be clear, science, it doesn't give us the answers, but it informs the options which we can take. And we already have some rigorous studies that have been performed. We've gone out and talked to community members, and it starts showing us what some of those benefits could be, but also what some of the concerns are that have to be addressed. As we look at benefits, one of the major one is that overland flooding that takes place, and the stressors it puts on both from the land and the property values, but also our infrastructure. The second would be the potential increase to habitat with wetlands that would be flourishing, with fish and wildlife populations that we already have diversity there, but a lot of the fish, for instance, they're very tolerant warm water species and a low diversity. So there probably would be, depending on the scenario, be an improvement to fish and wildlife. And also the benefit, potentially more public access, directed, and also recreational opportunities. Now with that said, there's risks involved in this as well. And one is, it's the water budget. Now when the Maple River, when it flowed, it used to be probably the same size as the Muskegon. That's amazing for me to think about. And actually the Maple River potentially could have been the main stem. So we don't know. But it probably was equal size when it split. And there's survey maps from 1837 that show that split in the sizes. So some of the issues, when that took place and the log started floating down the main stem, it widened the river. It shallowed the river. And because of that, we already have low water in the main stem. For any of you that fish, you know that. It's hard to navigate sometimes upriver. I've been out there before, and I think I'm drafting about that much above the bottom of the river, or dragging maybe. So whatever is done, navigation needs to be a key consideration for that. And that's already top on our radar. And there's options, to be able to enhance passage, probably even from what it is right now. So there could be a benefit, but it's something we need to address. Also, changes to riverbank property, like Scott had mentioned. It could be that the banks really don't change much, but there'd be water flowing through properties that hadn't been flowing for years. That's a change, and we recognize that any bit of change is going to bring up concern. What is it going to look like? Also, agricultural accessibility, of being able to access fields easily and not to have to drive a long ways to have that access. And also, the river channel obviously has changed. It's fairly dry, right? It has become shallower. It has become narrower, and there's sediment, there's debris, and there's vegetation in that channel. That's an issue, and that will need to be addressed as well. So those are some of from the science so far that's informed, and these aren't all the concerns and benefits that we see, but I think this is some of the primary ones. I said science informs the options, but the community guides those. And at the end of the day, the decision isn't going to be simply a scientific decision. That just informs it. This is what's going to guide it, though, is our community interaction. This is a project that was it was developed out of public concern. And it was a community-driven project. It's going to remain a community-driven project, where at the end of the day, there's gonna be a decision made that's going to be out in the open, there's gonna be discussion, and hopefully it's a broad discussion that we look at everything together, and the decisions aren't made until we balance and meet those needs as much as possible. Now, that might be not opening up, it might be opening up. And there's interesting scenarios too. I think the most important thing I can say to restoration, there is not a one size fits all. That never happens. I mean, there could be water let through where just enough to eliminate mosquito habitat. Or it could be, brought up not to the historic channel flow, but to something that is somewhere in between. Those are some of the options, but there's not a one size fits all. And within that, I really see this as that moment in time for us to be able to have that discussion about what would this look like? What should it look like? And come up with something that meets the most needs as possible. And I think that's my goal, as a scientist, but also as a person that lives in a community where restoration work is done. We've got to know what those options are. So with that, Scott, I think it's time to
Question time.
just start having those questions. We're going to
Turn the
have
lights back on.
Sarah will be writing down these questions. We see this as an opportunity to inform what we're looking at, and also to understand your perspective on what needs to happen.
When you do ask a question, if you could please state your first name and last name, that would be much appreciated. Thank you.
Scott, Frank, feel free to.
Questions, comments? We perfectly handled everything. This is great. Sally?
I was just wondering, for people whose properties it might impact negatively, would there be some kind of compensation that would make them feel better about going ahead with the project?
Well, that's a great question. I think it's too early to know what the impacts are. And I think the big thing we're hanging our hat on now is waiting for a really good hydrological analysis, because once you know that and you know the water budget, don't let it get out of my lane here, Marty. But once we know what the water budget looks like and say, if we increase the flow to Maple River, the old channel, how high is that gonna be? And how does that affect every property owner along the way? And as Marty mentioned too, there's a lot of folks that farm both sides of the channel. We gotta fix that. It's a bridge, it's something, we just don't know, it's too early. But as I mentioned though, the economic impact, that matters to the individual, right? It's not just writ large, it's like, well, all in all, it's all gonna work out. It's like, no, if you have a farm, we have to fix your problem. That's how we're going about the project. So if we had, for example, if you are a farmer and you own both sides of the channel, and you're used to going down and through it because it's dry during the summer, which is kind of handy, and now you have to go over it, we'd have to find out a solution for a bridge, and we'd have to fund it. So that's the way we're going at it. We have to solve the problem. Does that answer your question? Okay. All right.
I'm Kathy Whipple. I have a question. I'm more concerned right now with soil erosion. We have lost so much. Every time they raise that river, we have lost so much property. And the problem is, we have a certain number of feet on our property description, so it goes from point A to point B. Point B is across the river. So we're still paying the same property taxes. So I go to the Equalization Bureau and I said, look, we're not using this. What can we do? Can we get a tax abatement? Well, no, because what you lose here, you gain over there. It's
I'd like
really
to say I have the wisdom
frustrating.
to address that question, and I don't.
I am so
That's
frustrated.
complicated, yeah.
I mean, the soil erosion's been going on. We've been there since '94. And we keep losing more and more. We have moved our fire pit back 3 times already. In this last fall, we had to move it way back because it's eroding. And we're right there at Brooks Creek. And I also have a question for the fishery, because Brooks Creek comes out into the Muskogum River.
Yeah.
And at one point, to get somebody's attention, we dumped concrete all over the front of our bank. And we got their attention. We got a letter, and they said, I don't want that in there. I don't want concrete in there. I want to do something else. But because it's so large, we can't afford it. So I would really like that Maple River opened up to take some of the stress off of that bank.
Yeah, you bring up actually one of my biggest concerns, and within this area, probably what I go tour the most are those banks that are collapsing, right?
I mean, it's collapsing.
Yeah, it's amazing, and it's sad, and I think that is one indication from this project that it could be one of those pieces that greatly helps bank erosion in this area because of the flashiness of the river. And some people are saying 1 to 2 feet of loss per year, you know, depending on the year.
Oh, yeah.
So I agree, it's a major issue, and you know, that's one is that if and when, even if a project like this doesn't move forward,
We can still work on
is
that.
I'd love to talk to you and any others that have that erosion problem, because we're starting to work downriver to address that. That's a major issue. I feel for all landowners.
We even had Muskegon Conservation come in with a group and we planted all those trees and bushes. Half of them are in the river. And I've taken pictures and I've contacted them and said, what can we do? You know, at least let's put some logs or something there to protect it temporarily. But no, because we let people farm, they're not gonna help us. They told me that directly. As long as you're farming on the river, you're not gonna get any help.
Yeah, let's talk afterwards, because we
Yeah.
have a project right now we're working on
Okay.
that we can work with.
And we've been invited to walk the channel with several landowners, some of which are here today. Thank you for that. And it really helps us to get eyes on the ground. You know, so you can look at aerial maps all you want, but until
Yeah.
you have a chance to walk the channel. And likewise, I think visiting your property and seeing it both from the river and on top, you have a lot better idea what your options are.
Yeah,
But I imagine it's
absolutely.
pretty lively when you say, well, my property description says I have 7.8 acres. This year I have 7.6. How about reducing my property taxes? And they say, no.
No.
That's really not a great conversation, right? I think I understand where you're coming from, but we'd love to take a look at your property. See if there are some
Absolutely.
options. And like Marty said, that's with or without this big project. We can still focus on your situation on the watershed.
Yeah.
And maybe come up with some options.
I mean, I would be more than happy to set up some sort of fundraiser to help you guys. You know, let's do something with
Okay.
this. I mean, not only
was
for
easy.
Cedar Creek Township, but for Bridgeton Township as well.
Well, you bring that up, and this is like an unofficial announcement. We're hoping to have a fall event, probably at the 7 Mile Inn, because they have this great outdoor space to engage more folks to come out, and whether that turns into being a fundraiser for the project or just another informational. We really want to be visible in that part of the community, so we are planning on something like that.
Good,
To be determined, but it will be this fall.
good.
Yeah, but thank you for your comment. Sir?
My name is Joe Howes. I live just upriver from the split. I have a whole list of questions, but I'll try not to be a hog. I'll just start with 2. The first question is, when we talk about flood mitigation, so if this is a pinch point, what's the next pinch point downriver? Because we're not gonna, by doing this, we're not gonna increase the flow of the river and drain it all the way up the watershed. So if you move the pinch point down the river, where's that next pinch point? And how does that affect flow? Can you answer that question first?
Put your picture back up on there,
Yeah.
show him where the maples twist, and it'll go back down to the wetlands where it belongs. That's where it'll go.
So
The picture of that river shows it where that makes that turn, that's where your flood spot will be, across where Lane's Landing used to be,
Yeah, I know
in
what
that
you mean.
whole swampy area.
Yeah.
That's where it will flow, where it's supposed to flow in the first place when it floods.
yeah, and the interesting
Which
piece-
opens up a lot of flat land for.
Right where it's supposed to
Right,
go,
right,
it's all
right.
full of
All
cattails and
makes
everything
sense,
anyway.
yeah.
But it's a really good question, because the maple, it's positioned in an interesting spot, and it is kind of that pinch point where you have that high gradient coming down, and you have a pretty confined, narrow channel, to what you just described, where is all of a sudden the gradient becomes less, right, less steep, and it starts spreading out naturally. So it's a good location for that water to be redirected
Yeah.
downstream because of the flood capacity that it already has.
That makes a lot of sense, and that was one of the things.
That's
So
a
we're not looking at, it doesn't change the flow of the river because it'll be restricted farther down.
That's right.
And which is what I expected to hear, but I didn't know where that was. The next one is as much a concern as a comment, and that is main stem folks will see a reduction in flow as a result of the first question. And then there's the idea of property descriptions. So that main stem now, some people descriptions say to the thread of the river, and other people say on the government lot line. I don't know how you navigate this. Some people lose their river frontage, and some people get real estate on both sides of the threat of the river. Those are difficult questions to ask for anybody that lives in that main stem area. I don't know, how do you deal with that?
On a one-by-one basis, really, because you're right, it's different depending on the properties. And that also, that water budget we were talking about, that is probably gonna influence the water budget too, to have the least impact to the main stem, whether it's for property or for navigation, is figuring out what it should be and how do we have the least amount of impact to the river while still gaining benefit to the
Well,
maple.
just to finish that point,
Yeah.
anybody who lives here built their lives on the river as it flows today. So changing any of that, it changes what we bought. And that makes it difficult for those along that stretch.
And I'd also add that there's folks that make their living on the river. Fishing guides and livery folks have the same concern, right? And so we have to do this with our eyes wide open and just say, what is gonna be the impact of the things that we're suggesting? And so we really wanna do it with our eyes wide open with your comments in mind and with those of people that maybe aren't here.
Okay.
Fishing guides and
Oh,
those.
thank you.
Thank you.
So good.
Scott, would you talk again about, mention the partners who have supported the research?
Oh, sure. Linda's asking the question for those of you in back, the partners that have supported our research. There's locally, the Fremont Area Community Foundation provided us 2 grants, which was extremely awesome. One of them allowed us to fund the Michigan State University Economic Impact Analysis. They care about the impact on the economy of Bridgeton Township because that's their purview, plus Cedar Creek is a bonus. And another grant allows us to do public engagement strategies like meetings here. They fund us to be able to go out and tell people what we're up to. Am I missing any others?
Those are the two major.
Those are the 2 major ones, yeah. And then we also have a family foundation that likes what we're doing, and they've supplied some needed funding too so that we can do the work that we do. So we've got some support from good-sized organizations, all of which are interested in economic things as well as some environmental impact, and we're hoping that they continue to like what they see in what we're doing. Sir?
2 questions. The first is,
This is Ken Holka from the Managing Director of the Road Commission.
my first question is just pure interest, I guess. What evidence do you have? A lot of times when you have a stream or a river and there's multiple channels, one of them becomes intermittent over time. They naturally choke off. We see it where we have multiple culverts a lot. One will choke off and it'll only clean itself out when there's an excess flow. Do we have any evidence that way back when this truly flowed year-round forever? Or
We do.
for a significant portion of time?
Yeah, and they're based on they've done probes at the geology of the river to be able to see what soils are there, but, and they've reconstructed what that channel was. The other big piece was the 1837, the federal survey that they did, that by all accounts, the Maple may have been functioning more as a main stem than the actual Muskegon as we know it today. And the channel had at least enough capacity to have an equivalent amount of discharge going through the Maple as it did in the main stem. So the main piece, I think, of evidence, besides the geological information, is that 1837 survey that clearly shows the split. It looks almost equal size.
Which is hard to get your mind
But that's
around
a-
when you actually walk
that was
that
a good
channel.
Yeah, my other question is, or comment, obviously I'm here on behalf of the Road Commission, and such a project would certainly impact, Bain Road and Maple Island Road for us. And I guess we're envisioning potentially 2 new bridges on our system, and those are short-term, very expensive. We look at them as very, very expensive, short pieces of road. And typical bridge today is, they're in the $500,000 and up, depending on the span and what's needed. But then there's long-term maintenance of those structures and replacements. So it's a big, potentially a big issue for us.
Yeah, thanks for bringing it up. And Gail and I actually, and Greg Munn from Windsor Dick, we sat down with the road commissions about 3 years ago and started pricing and so I know they're different prices then than they are now, but started pricing bridges and working with the road commissions, and thank you, because it is that's a good point, very significant.
I sit on a local bridge committee
Yeah.
for West Michigan area for about 10 years now, and prices this year are up 25 to 35%.
Yep.
It's just the way it is. So a bridge last year that was 400,000 is 5.25 to 550 this year. Well, I don't see any of much happening.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
And again, depending on the span.
Yeah. Should be increasing span.
Another question, as long as I'm not taking someone else's, Joe House. When you look ahead 40, 50 years, if we split this thing again, you have 2 channels now, probably narrower, deeper maybe, and the vegetation fills that in. Then does that become one of those, it becomes a wetland or something like that with maybe a stream flowing through it? Does that slow the flow down and actually raise the river upstream? Especially in the winter time when it freezes and becomes an ice jam? So what happens to the folks upriver in 40 years?
We're floating in water.
Yeah, it's going to be part of the hydrologic study. What we do know is that at the discharge point where it goes back in, the volume of water coming in should be about the same. So having a negative impact based on the volume, I wouldn't expect that to happen, because at the confluence, the two split the water budget, but they come back together and have an equivalent.
Yeah, but my point was, the vegetation changes along the main stem and along that, where that's no longer open flowing water. That becomes now a wetland full of bushes and things like that collect the ice. And in the wintertime especially, I mean, we've experienced that live on the river. Once that collects the ice, then you have a new dam.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and part of that comes with that design piece.
Okay.
And it's talking with the hydraulic engineers, but also the community, and those types of concerns. Because there are strategies to make sure that those catch points are dealt with. Because that's a really good point.
I recognize that you have to think that through, but I guess for the benefit of all of us,
Yep.
we want to make sure that we haven't created a new dam or a new pinch point.
Yep. I had the opportunity to go down and tour the braids this summer, kind of went to all 3 of the main channels down in a very complex area, right? And so we really have to look beyond the project area, to your point, saying, okay, well, we're looking at Maple River. What about on the way to the Lake Muskegon and Lake Michigan? And
We don't care about those
This is a not in my backyard thing. Okay.
But Joe, your point's
It is.
well taken, because I think what this meeting informs us next is having those meetings to say, hey, these are the list of concerns that have been brought up. What are the options? How can we address these, and how do we address these in the design? So I appreciate you bringing up those questions, because we're listing them, and make sure we have a nice discussion about these. What will it look like? What does it need to? So we appreciate you bringing those up.
And while it appears that we're not taking notes up here, it's
I know
correct.
you are.
Sure it is. So we're noting everything that we can to be sure we can address them. So, any other questions or comments? We are grateful for your participation. Next time, I hope it's bigger, and we'll have more things coming out. I suspect that by the time we meet in the fall, we'll probably have the economic impact analysis done. We will not have the Army Corps study done for months past that. But as we learn more, we are going to share more. And today was just designed to be one of those moments to say, this is what we've been working on. Are we on the right track? We're on track. Are we asking the wrong questions? Are there other things we can be doing? And you guys have really been great about giving us other things to think about. Chuck?
Hey, I'm Chuck Skinner. I'm the clerk here at Cedar Creek. And first off, I'd like to tell everybody that if you have questions and you can't find anybody else, I'm usually here 3-4 days a week, and feel free to bring your questions through me. Scott's been very helpful to reach out to people that I've sent information about them to, so we can help facilitate your contacting them. One of the big questions that was raised and affects my personal property along the Maple River And people are wondering, and I know we have hydrological studies coming, but the big question is if we open up the Maple River, will it raise the water table and thereby bring up the floodplain on those surrounding properties? I realize that in some cases the answer might be yes, but generally, would you expect like the water table to come up, or a superfluous amount of flooding to occur because of this? In my head, I'm a sciencey math guy, and I see kind of both sides of it. Maybe it will, maybe it won't, but I don't know the real answer because I'm not a hydrologist, obviously. So I'm just a clerk.
Yeah, I mean, the water table and the aquifer, because it's such a huge volume of water coming from the Muskegon, that there likely would be no change at all. And the capacity of it to absorb based on the water table. I think the biggest benefit from a flooding perspective is that it's able to carry the water from upstream to downstream in a much more efficient manner, and have that buffer, because we're talking about a buffer. If the water currently at that time can't reach the buffer over here, it's worthless, right? What it does is it overtops. So we have a kind of this buffer capacity that currently isn't being tapped into. But it's a good point about looking at the groundwater, the water table, aquifer, and making sure that those models address it.
I mean, this just may be a hypothetical comment. I guess when I looked at those, there's people and economics and sustainability, and I can't quite remember environmental. My guess is that there isn't one that has more weight than another. Although, I'm just wondering about that in a way, because, we human beings tend to be very short-sighted in our lives. We want to know what's good for us right now, and maybe our kids. Sometimes we don't even think too far down that way for our culture. So that sustainability piece is very interesting to me. And it's more than just sustainability for a very short period of time and for a very few number of people. So that's I'm not asking a question, I'm just bringing that up because, our rivers and shorelines have been in charge for a very long time, and we still don't accept that.
Yeah.
We still want to, build and do things and change things to fit what our needs or pleasures. And so that sustainability piece is very interesting to me, and would just want to keep an eye on that in the long run.
Yeah, it's interesting from the perspective of, talking about a water budget, and with changes from the community, but also just our atmospheric changes taking place, is being able to adjust based on current needs and situations. And if a reopening does occur, there will need to be an adjustable structure. So there can be, if part of this we model the best that we can, but we'd also have the ability to track the amount of water coming in and to adjust it based on how it's responding. So as far as sustainability, we should have a lot more kind of latitude to make changes that benefits ecologically and the community too over time.
How you gonna clean that
Hey,
river
can
out?
I bump you
Yep,
just one
go right ahead.
second? This applies to you.
Oh, there you go.
When Scott and Marty first came here, I think it was in September, and they came to speak to our board. David Bain made this presentation to the Cedar Creek Township Board, and it was pretty impassioned, and we were literally all sitting there, and it was very difficult for all of us we were choked up, quite frankly. And with that said, Cedar Creek Township, if you look around us, it is beautiful during all 4 seasons. We don't have a lot of industry here. We don't have a lot of commerce. We have rivers and lakes and forests. We worked really hard to work with Eagle to get a grant to build the recycling in our township. and we are very environmentally conscious here. And you bring your recycling to us.
I do.
So with that said, we're looking to the future. That's part and parcel to who we are in Cedar Creek Township. So sustainability is really important. We care about our rivers, our streams, our lakes here. That's who we are here. We build ourselves, we care about that. If we don't, what do we have to offer here except that? We're a bedroom community built on our beauty. So when David talked to us about what was happening to him, we thought, what do we do? So we listened to Scott and Marty, and we thought, what harm can come if we don't move forward and look at the study? What can it hurt but to move forward on a study? A study can't hurt. Right. So that's what we did. We voted unanimously to take a look at the study. Bridgeton did the same thing.
Absolutely.
So, and the audience was unanimously in support of that as well. So, David, now it's up to you.
I'm gonna try not to get emotional. David Bain. Between me and him, nobody's lived on the Muskegon River longer. We've been there for 4 generations, and my son's at home working right now, the 5th. I guess a couple comments. One to your road, you're gonna get to replace the Muskegon River bridge crossing at Maple Island if you don't do this project, because it's gonna eat the end of the bridges out. So you're gonna have that cost anyway. You can quit replacing that bridge every 30 years. If we put another bridge in on Maple Island Road and open that river and alleviate some of the pressure on the banks. Second thing, you're gonna get to move River Road, and you're gonna get to buy a whole lot of homes that lay along that road, because you're gonna have to move River Road over, and they're not just gonna move it 5 feet, they're gonna move it 30. And you're gonna have a whole bunch of homes you're gonna get to buy. So, I don't know, I can probably do it on a piece of paper and show you where you could buy a bridge. And you can eliminate the one on Bain Road, because that could be a dead end and a public access to the river. Secondly, my family's lived on the river before. I know what it was like. I've lost 18 feet of river frontage off where my home is, a 100-foot lot. 18 feet. It's on the description. I got abstracts that before this was a township. So I know where the river used to lay. And there is going to be, if you want to talk about sustainability, there's going to be short-term pain on the main stem. But now let's look off past our lifetimes. When that river becomes deeper, narrower, but deeper, that study that Mike did shows that you're going to increase the depth of that main stem tremendously. Terry's got, and I got 2 charts that shows there used to be 22 feet of water in front of my house. 22 feet. It's not there no more. So you don't have to do this project, and that Muskegon's going to keep filling that in. And that river's coming for the other side of Maple Island Road. It's going to get there. Maybe not in 10 years.
Yep.
Maybe not in 20. But 50 years from now, it's claiming the other side of Maple Island Road. And you'll either get to raise your road and put more tubes in, or it'll take it out. Because it's working its way there, because that's where it wants to go. And it's going to get there. It just keeps filling them banks in, and that river gets shallower and shallower and shallower. When I was young, nobody walked that river. You had to learn how to swim. I got a grandson who in the middle of summer walks that river all the way across and never gets over his belly button.
Yeah.
It's the same amount of water in twice the width of channel. So you're sitting there, and so it keeps filling in every time we get a rain event now. Where it used to take 13 inches to flood, now it takes 5. You go a few years from now, it's going to take 2.
regardless of how your feelings are about climate change or anything else. You get a 2-3 inch rain event and that keeps putting that river over the top of the bank, it's coming from Maple Island Road and the other side anyway. So that's just my opinion. I can't wait for the study to be done. So thank you.
By the store and stuff.
Anybody else?
I don't understand where that's coming, where it's coming.
Question, gentlemen?
Huh?
Did you have a question?
Well, I was gonna say, how you gonna flush that maple out?
Yeah.
Because that maple is probably about 10 feet above what the river is, I would say.
Yeah, at least.
Yeah.
Yep.
Now, how are you gonna flush that maple out?
It doesn't, it depends, we do that on a case-by-case basis. If-
A what now?
A case-by-case basis.
Yeah.
Because it would depend on the landowner, but fortunately, this isn't the only time that there've been abandoned river channels that have been opened up, where they've done different extraction techniques. One is before water is even let in there, you do kind of mechanical harvesting of the trees that are in the channel, but also removal of the sediment before water even flows through. The other option is there's basins that you can install that will collect sediment, and then you can empty those basins out. So there's a suite of different techniques that can be used. We're not at that point yet where we've, evaluated that, but fortunately, there's options before water even flushes to remove.
Now, you guys figuring out putting a bridge in on Maple Island Road then? Another bridge in? And then how about Bain Road now? What are you gonna do with that?
We still are in the process of learning from our studies.
David did make a good point about Bain Road though. If they won't put a bridge in, they could make it public access. It's not that long a road and there's not that many people on it. I'm one of them. So.
Because this ordeal's gonna affect me a lot, because I own all that land along there, on both sides of that river down through there,
Where's that at, sir?
on Radon Island.
And I'm sure that when we get the studies back, we have a broader, a better understanding of what we're dealing with. That you don't eat an elephant, all at once. You do it a bite at a time. And so we're probably going to come up with a host of projects that are related to restoration and kind of work it from different angles. We bought our property up in Croton in 1987, 1 year after the big flood, where we almost all lost it all. We thought that was a great time to buy property because everyone was fleeing and trying to sell their properties. And we can do all that we want, but if we get another 13 inches in 12 hours or whatever, all the work we're doing here will be useful, and at the same time, it will also change everything again. So, we all live on the river, and we're going to be impacted by rain. When it rains in Muskoka Township, it matters here. And nobody knows it more than you guys. And we have that happen at home all the time, where Sally and I live, is that when it rains upriver, we find out about it fast, and this is where it all ends. So we're hoping that this will turn out to be a thoughtful project over the next number of years when we're working through it. And again, just to reiterate a couple points, we have no permits, we have no money to do this project right now today. We are finding out the best we can. Once we have the information, that's when we meet and we all have decisions to make. And we're not going to do them in a smoke-filled room. We're going to do them here.
I got another question. Who runs that Hardy Dam up there? Who takes care of that?
That's a complicated question.
Yeah. Well, that's the question that, this is a bunch of bullshit, because what happens, we get a heavy rain and then they let that go up, and then all of us, they decide to let that son of a gun down.
Yeah.
And then it floods everybody down below.
Yeah.
And it's a bunch of crap. If there's a storm coming in, why don't they drop that sucker a couple foot? And it would take care of a lot of problems. Raise that river up a couple foot, and it would take care of a lot of problems. But otherwise, they just let it come down and flood everybody out downstairs down here, and then everybody's pissed off about it.
I hear you. And it's a good question, complicated answer. So consumers is the licensee.
Yeah, but this is another question I'm going to throw at you. How long is that dam going to stay in? When's the idea of this ever going to get tore out? Or, because this thing is getting old. Now, how old is that dam?
Croton was built in 1911. and
1911?
Harding 32, so that's with plus or minus a year or more. Both of those hydros are up for relicensing in 2034.
So what are
Not
they gonna
that
do
far
with
away.
that? Are they
Yeah.
gonna tear it out?
Unlikely. Unlikely.
So they're gonna rebuild it?
No, they're probably gonna, you know what, I'm not an expert on that subject, I don't know.
Well-
But it's gonna be up to FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, consumers, DNR, everybody's gonna have to come to, and we're
So
engaging in that discussion.
They had
now.
some kind of problem with that a few years back
Yep.
with that thing leaking, wasn't there?
Croton.
Yeah.
That was precarious, watching that getting fixed. Fixing a dam while it's still operating.
Yeah.
I drove past it every morning
Yeah.
on my way to work. Yeah. So I don't know, sir. I mean, you're not the only ones. If you live just below Croton Dam, they have no love lost for Consumers Energy in the way that they run Croton Dam, because there's flooding in their neighborhood, and Consumers is like, sorry that FERC makes us run the dam this way. So you're not alone in your concern, but it's certainly not anything that we can fix. It's just not. It's something you show up for public comment whenever you have a chance.
Well, somebody ought to learn how to run that damn thing up there. You know, start paying attention to it, what's going on.
It's especially frustrating because if you go up to Hardy now, you know, they drop it 14 feet, 16 feet. It's empty up there. It's a little weird looking. There's beach run, all around it. And you'd think that with that kind of capacity that they could do exactly that, right? That there's that kind of leeway. For those of you that aren't aware, the project that's being redone up there is the emergency spillway section. It's a huge project, and they're going to drop that dam at least 30 feet, the water level 30 feet for a year and a half to do the work. So if you want to talk about economic impact, if you run a marina or a campground up on Hardy, it's going to be a rough year, and that's coming. So that also has to do with FERC and the licensee and the complexities of all that. Takes a person far wiser than me to answer your question, sir. So.
I made a tongue-in-cheek comment a few minutes ago about not caring what goes downstream.
We knew you didn't
well,
mean that.
I know, but sometimes these things get taken out of context, and I just wanted to,
Yeah.
I wanted for the record that we
Yeah.
care
Far more
deeply
sensible than that.
what happens
Yeah.
downriver. I got thinking about that. I thought,
Yeah.
they put that on the news, that's a horrible comment.
Joe, I didn't hold it against you.
I know, David, I'm a smart guy, but I got, thank you. I didn't want there to be misunderstood.
So noted. You did not mean that.
Sally.
Can you give a recap if you're, or an idea of time frame of next steps? I heard about another fall kind of a thing possibly, but in
Yeah.
terms of the studies themselves, about a timeline of the
Yeah.
next things.
I think on the economic impact analysis, short number of months before we'll have news from Michigan State University, and they'll say, here's the scenarios that we're running, here's what we have. We're going to share that stuff, right? We don't hoard information. You'll know. And on the Army Corps of Engineers, preliminarily, Marty thinks that's a 1 year type of time horizon. Yeah, some about a year. So this time next year, that's going to be big news for all of us, right? When we get that, hopefully we'll all be able to discern what it actually says once you go through. Hopefully there's an executive summary that even I can understand. And so we'll get together as these studies come out. That's when we get together and start talking about the other impacts. So that's a timeline that's relatively okay. This fall we want to have another meeting anyway, because to the outside world, for those of us that don't live here, we need to see what we're talking about. And so having an event maybe at 7 Mile would be great, so that we could take people and show them different components of it and talk about how much we know, how much we've learned. So those are just some of the timelines. Am I missing anything that we're? Yeah, and there's some other opportunities. We're looking for funding for different components of this that we've applied for. When we get them, we will be public about that too, and say, hey, we have funding for this part of the project, and be able to share that with everyone. Chuck?
Scott, I know that Linda has a newsletter she sends out a couple times a year, and we've also put into our agenda on a monthly basis Muskegon River Water Assembly update.
Okay.
Where anything I get from you, I share with the public, and it goes out on our website as well. Andy O'Reilly videotapes everything. So that's out on the website.
Nice.
So people that aren't necessarily able to come to a meeting can still get that information. And that's what I was alluding to before. If you have a question, call here, or I'm sure Janice's staff would help in any way they can to disseminate this information as it comes through. So.
Yeah. And I know Janice is also doing posts on Facebook with whatever we send her.
On
and all
Facebook,
that.
we'll have a website within a couple weeks.
Okay.
So
Yeah,
It will all
and
go on there.
if you like monthly updates, we do that, so we have our board meetings once a month. There's always a Maple River update of some kind, and so we'll be more proactive about sending you that stuff, so as it happens, you're a little bit more up to date with us.
Everything you put, like this will be on our website.
Okay.
So
Gotta watch what I wear next time.
it'll be out on Facebook, so
Okay.
this, Andy will post it right away.
Just,
We still think you're a great guy, by the way.
that might change. Just a question about this erosion that we are already experiencing in boating. You know, we get a lot of boats that run up and down the river, and they agitate a lot.
the jet boats especially.
Well, all any of the boats. I mean, even my little 12-foot boat makes waves, and it rubs
Like the
against.
jet boats.
If you change this thing, does it change navigation?
What do you think, Mike?
Yeah.
It's deeper?
It will. I mean, the long-term forecast, like David said, is that the channel will start pushing and scouring itself out, so it'd be deepening
Okay.
and narrowing. So over long term, there should be gains in navigation. Also, there'd be buffer on the banks as well. You know, as the shoreline would recede down, but it would also get deeper.
Yeah.
In the short term, there have been projects that have done large-scale restoration like this, but that was a concern. What happens to that low-flow area where they were able to use some natural material to hydrologically alter the channel and actually have a low-flow channel that boats could pass through?
Yeah.
And so those are some of the options, you know, if this move forward, we'll be looking at with Eagle and with DNR. So how can we make sure that that remains before we get a deeper channel, you know, within 5-10 years probably?
Is there someone here from Windsor, Dick? I know you will read. Oh, you're, okay. We were a recipient of the grant from Windsor Dick. The trees that are in our park back here.
Actually, I think it was through MRWA as well.
So we're really fortunate because we're part of the watershed. We were able to receive a large number of trees. So, I mean, that's great.
Yeah. Tree plantings are super important, and they're easy and they're fun. Great family activities. It's good to get groups of people together to do it. We've got several hundred trees coming in this spring that we're doing upriver in different places, so that's another thing we'll be looking at, particularly as we redo, if we're able to do this project, we're going to need for a lot of trees for bank stabilization, so.
If you are able to do the project and then river naturally narrows and deepens, are these farmers gonna be able to reclaim that land they've lost?
Well, it's prior converted wetlands from 1985. You can't clear it wood, you can't do nothing. So it'll end up going back to natural, which is probably a good thing, but you'll get a tree line established. Like my grandpa left, and my great-grandfather, that the river is all claimed now, so it won't be them sharp edges and, you know, where the banks are. That ain't the way it was 50 years ago. There was trees all along that. Them old timers didn't just cut trees to the river's edge and decide they were gonna farm right up to the edge. They were smarter than that. But that thing it'll end up being not that straight up and down bank. It'll erode down. You'll end up with a gradual bank like there is on the rest of the river. And you know, and then once vegetation gets started in it, and when you do get a high water event, instead of eating into the sidewalls, it'll scour itself down deeper, and that's what the river's supposed to do. Not that you won't eliminate all erosion. You're living on a river. There's always going to be some. This is unnatural erosion. This ain't natural erosion. It's caused by man. It wasn't caused by Mother Nature deciding that she was going to go in and cut these channels that she's cut along that river. Because I've been on it enough to know that it's kind of a unique area between where that maple used to start and where it discharges. I guess in the way, I don't know a whole lot about it. Just a Holton High School graduate. But they age a river by the steepness of its banks. And that river's 200 years younger between them 2 points than it is on the rest of the river. So you need to get it back to the age of the river that it is. Because it will eventually do where it wants to go anyway. Water wins every time.
I want to thank everybody for coming again this morning. If there's nothing else, we have business cards up here. My cell phone's on it. Call me if you have any additional questions or concerns. And We're gonna stay here for a little while. If anybody wants to talk privately, we can do that.
And
We
there's,
have another,
there's,
oh,
yeah, goodies back
donuts.
there.
Oh. Okay, if you're going back to work, take donuts to your coworkers. If you have kids that love donuts, take some donuts.
Outta here.
Have another cup of coffee, please. Otherwise.